Okay, so good afternoon. Very nice to have a chance to be here with you guys today. Um, so I wanted to continue on giving some explanation of these stages of the path. So giving an explanation of these the stages of the path. So this to give the full context here, when I talk about the stages of the path, technically, this is the stages of the path to enlightenment. And so the term enlightenment or nirvana or liberation or whatever is thrown around fairly casually. I don't know, or not so casually. It's used to describe lots of, Nirvana's the rock band. There's the company I worked for was talking about attaining DevOps enlightenment and so forth. You can use these terms fairly casually, but there's very specific meaning, and it's very different from just being a good person or being a more peaceful person or going to heaven or these things, which I think are a little bit easier for us to wrap our minds around. So attaining enlightenment or attaining nirvana is something quite subtle and quite sophisticated, but it's not necessarily nearly as far away or different it's not nearly as far away as we might think that it is, for example. And the way to get there, it's a little bit like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? Just like click your red, red ruby slippers together 3 times, and say, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home." Right? There's a little bit of a similarity there. Nirvana, this term really means like ceasing or extinguishing. It's like a candle flame going out, and the candle flame in particular is the candle flame of our ignorance. That is the cause of our suffering. And the interesting thing about a candle flame is that it is produced by fuel, right? There is no fuel, there is no flame. So the candle flame, even a big fire may seem like a forest fire or something like that, may seem impossible to put out, may have been running for a very long time, right? But if it runs out of fuel for whatever reason, it simply stops, right? And so when we talk about nirvana or liberation, what we're talking about is extinguishing this fire of suffering by extinguishing this fire of ignorance that's burning inside of our heart all the time. Now you might think, oh, that's too difficult. But the analogy that we use to understand anything can go a long way towards helping us to understand it. And our preconceptions about things also have a huge impact on how we think about the world and how easy or how difficult things are. So I grew up with a worldview somewhat shaped by the psychologists of the 20th century, Freud and so forth. And one of the, there's a couple of the big thinkers of the 19th and 20th century, like Darwin and Freud. Everybody cites them, even if you've never read them or whatever. But you get the basic idea. Darwin's all this idea that life is a struggle for survival of the fittest, right? And Freud, the idea that seething inside of our hearts are these animal-like desires, violence, sexual desire, that the animal world is fundamentally oriented towards violence and uncontrolled desires, and that humanity kind of keeps that, civilization kind of keeps that tamped down, but just beneath the surface of our well-ordered Victorian society, if you're Freud, just beneath it, or I guess he's Austrian, so maybe not Victorian, but whatever the equivalent of traditional European society, beneath the surface of that order and structure, there's this raging animalistic mind, right? And fundamentally, what's in our hearts is this, like this id, this uncontrolled parts of the mind that we repress, unconscious. Um, but that's all, both of those are just a worldview, right? And if you look at nature, you can make the argument that nature proceeds through competition. Yeah, that's a reasonable argument. You can also make the argument that nature proceeds through cooperation. There's a lot of great biologists and thinkers who've, made the case over the last century that Darwin was skewed. Darwin fundamentally skewed by the European society that he grew up in to orient everything towards competition as opposed to cooperation. That cooperation is every bit as essential to survival and evolution and thriving and prospering as competition, perhaps more so. And humans are naturally social creatures. Most animals are social creatures, even insects. Many insects are social creatures. Why? Because cooperation. And to the point of Freud, right, like talking about the underlying nature, if you peel back the superficial layers of our personality, what do you find? Do you find these, like, primarily violent, sexual, animalistic, uncontrolled, intense desires? Well, I mean, maybe there are layers of that, but when you keep peeling the onion of our psychology, what do you get at the bottom of it all? Well, for example, a Buddhist explanation is that at the very bottom of it all, you find peace. And I don't know if this is a perfect proof point, but this idea that everyone is an angel when they're sleeping. You take a hyperactive child, you take a arrogant politician, you take a mass murderer. In their sleep, they're angels, right? They're just so peacefully snoring away, right? We are agitated under certain circumstances, like these children who maybe have a sensitivity to a food coloring, they become hyperactive or whatever. Some agitating circumstances disturb the mind, create some unpeacefulness. But what's beneath the surface of the mind? What's at the deepest level of the mind? Perhaps it's not uncontrolled, disturbed minds after all. Perhaps it's peace. And back to this idea of nirvana, that if you take this as a worldview, right, that humans are naturally oriented towards cooperation, collaboration, and the underlying nature of the mind is peace, and that living beings are born wanting and assuming and expecting to be able to trust and love the family into which they're born, right? And then that trust and love gets shaken, of course, and battered down and whatever else. But in our hearts, there is an extraordinarily peaceful potential. All we have to do to reveal that peaceful potential is stop providing fuel to the flame that is causing these disturbed states of mind, and these states of mind that cause suffering for ourselves and suffering for others. And that is the meaning of nirvana. It is the cessation of our ignorance, and thereby the cessation of our suffering, through stopping putting fuel into the fire that is burning and creating these misconceptions about the world. And when we stop that fire, it's not that we disappear, it's not that mind disappears, not that the world disappears. All that disappears is this misconception that skews our perceptions and causes suffering and causes unpeacefulness. And so when I say nirvana is not necessarily nearly as far away as we might think it is, that it's like Dorothy with her ruby red slippers, that's what I mean, right? That it's there all the time, and you have these interesting seeming paradoxes, right? Where where you have points of view through which you see everyone is enlightened already, right? This like imagining that everyone's enlightened already, or in fact seeing that that's already the case. Some schools say everyone's enlightened already, they just don't know it. But of course, it's a technicality. Can you really be enlightened if you don't know it? Well, no, but by definition, it's sort of realizing that nature. And if you think I'm enlightened and you're not, well, that probably indicates an arrogance, right? And so, of course, there's ways you can go wrong with these understandings, but hopefully, this allows us to think a little bit freshly about what this means and how deep a transformation we can make just by adjusting our understanding of the world. So, uh, I'd like to begin with a relatively brief meditation because there's a number of points that I want to share to explain this topic known as the 12 dependent related links. The 12 dependent related links I've introduced once a few weeks ago, but the one challenge with this topic is that there's 12 points. And 12 points is a little bit much for our human attention span to fully absorb in one session. So I'll give it a little bit more time and I'll simplify it down when I explain it. But okay, so let's take a bit of time for meditation, a little bit more brief than usual, really just focusing on our breathing to settle the mind. So we can find a comfortable position and take a deep breath in and out. Then another breath, inviting ourselves to relax. And as we relax, we can think tension takes energy, worry takes energy, being upset takes energy. Why do we keep fueling these states of mind? Why do we keep fueling uncomfortable bodily states, mental states? What happens if we stop fueling these states? What happens if we stop fueling states of mind that are based on misconceptions and cause suffering for ourselves and others? And so we can spend just a few minutes in a state of peace, recognizing liberation is not far away. It is perhaps only one breath away. And then we can think we have this opportunity today to deepen our wisdom, our understanding. So we can help ourselves and others to become free from suffering. And even if this subject isn't immediately clear, approaching it with a good motivation sets the foundation for gradually understanding clearly. With this motivation, we can open our eyes, rise from meditation. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. See if this works. All right, so I've got some pictures here. And I'm using these pictures in hopes that this makes provides a way to describe this. It's a bit easier to discern, but this is a summary of the 12 dependent related links, and I've hidden a few details. You'll see I've hidden a few in here and hidden a few in here to simplify it. And again, the problem or the challenge with describing the 12 dependent related links is that there's 12 of them. there's this saying called the rule of 5 plus or minus 2, which is that humans with our working memory can generally remember 5 things at once, plus or minus 2, maybe 3 to 7 things. So this sort of violates that fundamental law. So I've condensed it down to just a small number of things: ignorance, actions, dualistic appearance, attachment, and then existence. So that's 5. We'll just focus on those for now. This is a traditional model for understanding the mind from the inside out. These days we have the benefit of psychology, which offers a lot of different models for understanding the mind and different frameworks, and they all have benefits and usefulness and so forth. But this is an unusually profound and deep framework for understanding the mind. But it's like any psychological framework, it's something that we have to investigate in our own experience to see if this is true, right? Something we have to check to see if this is actually how our mind works. Where when I think about frameworks, another famous framework of 12 is the 12 Steps program in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've not been through the program, talked to a bunch of people extensively who've spent time with that. And each step provides some very specific benefits, developing, making amends for past harm that we've done, developing some faith in some kind of a higher power and so forth. Each of these steps provides some skillful instruction. These 12 dependent related links are not so much a set of 12 instructions. They're more like a description of the system that underpins our mind. So when I describe the way Freud described the id and the ego and the superego, that's one system for understanding the mind. This is a similar system. Now, the specific system, the 12 dependent related links, culminates, the last 3 links are these: birth, aging and death, and then existence. And the 12 dependent related links explain why we die. So why do you die? So when you hear that phrase, why do we die? Strange phrase, right? You tend to think about, well, there's a car accident or your heart stops beating or this or that, right? You're thinking about the conditions that cause that death. But there's something quite subtle going on when we say, I will die. To really understand that, you not only have to understand death, you have to understand I. So who is the I? Who's the I that's going to die? And I've given classes in the past talking about the poetry of this, like a cloud never dies. This is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh: a cloud never dies. It's very powerful. It's very profound. So who is this I that will die? Where do they come from? To understand death, what's the cause of death? Birth. Again, sounds slightly obvious, but if you were never born, you could never die. But what does that mean? You were born. Who was born? What do you mean you were born? Who is the you? So, like, you graduated, right, from high school or whatever. You ate dinner. You were born. Mentally, we use this exact same framework. There's a you who's doing something, or something was done to you. So either you borned yourself, you gave birth to yourself, not exactly, or somebody birthed you, but somehow there was a you that was born. This is not just semantics. It's not just wordplay. We have a sense that we exist. And what does that mean, the sense of existence? It means that we are gathering together, we're collecting some sense of an identity. And it is a conception that spans time and spans space. So we have physical parts. I can say, I touch the microphone. And when I say I touch the microphone, technically it's the finger that touches the microphone. But we say I touch because we're identifying ourselves with the finger, or I want something. But clearly when I say I want something, it's not the finger that wants something. There's something else. There's an intention, there's a wish. The I is a very slippery thing, right? I like the example of video games, like I got to the next level. Oh, they killed me in the video game. We can identify with the video game character. We can identify with all these things. I is a very flexible thing. All the I is, it's a word. It's a conception. It's an idea that we gather together all of our past, present, and future moments, and we think of it as one thing. It's like grouping it together. Like when I say to you, America, you group all these associations together into one thing. What is America? Well, America's great, or America's terrible. It really entirely depends on what you think of that object. What is the I? Are you great? Are you terrible? Just we gather together all kinds of thoughts, our physical body, past, present, future moments. We gather them all together and we identify this as the I. And in that way, we have brought the I into existence. We bring the I into existence the way we bring a country into existence, through our collective agreement. There's all kinds of new things being created today, cryptocurrencies. People bring a cryptocurrency into existence through some common agreement. Companies, you found a startup. What was the startup? It was an idea. And then you bring that idea into existence, and has some legal existence. Anyway, this is the way we create things. But because of the way that we exist in our own mind, we are vulnerable to death, because we have been born, we're vulnerable to death, we're vulnerable to aging. Our body is changing moment by moment. My body used to be I used to do martial arts in college, and I used to be, strong, fast, whatever. And I saw myself in the mirror the other day, and I'm like, you're pretty scrawny, guy. I was at the gym and I like try to lift like some weights. And you see these people lifting these massive weights, and then I'm lifting these very puny weights. And I'm like, this is about all I can do. Um, and so I've got this self-conception of like, oh, I'm strong and fast, right? But that was a self-conception from 25 years ago. It's not a very good match for the current state of my body, for example. So, and I used to know a lot of things that I've forgotten more than most people will have learned in their whole lives, right? There's somebody who saying like that, we forget these things, we lose these capabilities, but we still have this sense of an I, right? But the I is changing moment by moment. It's always, we're losing some aspects of ourselves. It's changing constantly. But the difference between our belief about ourselves, our view of ourselves, and the constantly changing reality that is always in flux, that is a cause for suffering. And so these parts of the 12 dependent related links, this is where suffering lives. Suffering lives in the difference between your beliefs about who you are and the constant, ever-changing, difficult to pin down nature of what's actually happening. Like, I am a highly intelligent, competent person early in the morning when I've got caffeine flowing through my brain. You ask me certain questions late in the afternoon, and I am no longer a highly intelligent, competent person, except maybe the adrenaline makes me a bit more smart at that time because I'm terrified of giving a bad answer. But even day to day, right, our mental capabilities going up and down, we're subject to constant, ever-changing, this impermanence. And this is what Thich Nhat Hanh was saying. We're more like a cloud. More like a cloud. And what he was saying, a cloud never dies. Right? So that's the possibility of freedom. However, that sounds wonderful when you hear me say it. And a cloud never dies. But then when we actually have to do stuff, we're not thinking we're a cloud. Right? We're thinking we're a person under time pressure, right? We're thinking we're a person, with who has to get stuff done, right? But so where does this sense of existence come from? Where does this sense of existence come from? Interesting aspect is that it comes from attachment, and hidden in here, there's actually a sequence of steps. Let me show these: contact, feeling, craving, grasping, but they can all be summarized. I'm just going to hide that. I'll show you again just so you can see it. But contact, feeling, craving, grasping, they're all grouped together in this one thing called attachment. And all attachment means is that we are trying to be somebody. We are always trying to be somebody. Your parents maybe told you at some point, if you really want to be somebody, you need organizational skills. You need determination. We're trying to be somebody all the time. I'm trying to be, a nice husband. I'm trying to be a thoughtful, helpful coworker. I'm trying to be this. I'm trying to be that. Now, all of that requires some energy, and all of that requires us to gather together all of these internal resources to try to be that thing. And we think, well, what on earth is wrong with that? That's what life is, right? That's what we spend our life doing. We build up skills and accomplishments and memories and capabilities and friendships, and we spend our whole life building up all these things. What on earth is wrong with that? Nothing, right? Nothing's wrong with that, except for the fact that we're going to lose it all. All the things you've learned, you're going to forget them. All the friendships you've made, you'll all separate them. You'll be eventually separated from them. But it used to say the end of rising is falling. The end of meeting is parting. The end of rising, the end of meeting is parting. The end of the end of accumulation is dispersion. The end of meeting is parting. The end of rising is falling. The end of birth is death. These four. The end of accumulation is dispersion. The end of rising is falling. The end of meeting is parting. The end of birth is death. that dispersion is implicit in accumulating. When you accumulate things, it means that those things didn't naturally belong together in the first place. They've just been accumulated temporarily. They weren't always together. They won't always be together. The end of meeting is parting. If two things can meet, it implies that they're not one thing. They're two things, right? The end of meeting is parting. If they can come together, they go apart, right? The end of rising, if something can rise, means it's not fixed at a certain low level or high level. It can rise, it can fall. The end of birth is death. Philosophically, all makes sense. Experientially, we absolutely do not want all of our possessions to be dispersed. We absolutely do not want all of the people we've met to be parted from all the people we met. We absolutely do not want all of the status we've accumulated and risen to. We absolutely do not want to fall. And we absolutely do not want to die. And that wish, that deep wish, not to lose our stuff, not to be parted from the things we like, not to lose our status, our high status, not to die, it's attachment. It's a wish. It's a strong wish. And again, by all means, accumulate things. By all means, meet. By all means, rise. By all means, be born, right? But you must know that none of it will last. All of it will go away. And you must be at peace with that, or you will experience suffering. That's all. This is the truth, and we must be at peace with the truth, or we will experience suffering. Now, the difference between desire and attachment is a little bit subtle, but attachment implies that we will suffer, right? A wish to a clinging to these things. And you see these words, craving, grasping, so it implies a clinging to these things. So that's attachment. Whisking through these 12 dependent related links. But in this way, maybe this makes a bit of sense how it is that something like a desire, this attachment, which is a desire, how is it that something like a desire can bring something into existence? Easy. It happens all the time. A dinner party. You desire to meet with your friends. You bring that dinner party into existence, and it exists. You've got a party. It's happening. Wonderful party. But it doesn't intrinsically exist. Even when we think about things in the past, we think, oh, the dinner party, oh, that dinner party, oh, that was great. But we think about it as if it still exists. It's like it exists in the past. We have all these reminiscences clinging to the past. When a dinner party ceases, it has completely vanished. There are no past things. And there's a totally separate topic, right? But past things, by their very nature, do not exist, right? They literally have completely gone out of existence. That's the meaning of past and future. So why do we generate an unrealistic desire for these things? Well, first of all, we have to give ourselves a little bit of credit. Just to have a mind is an amazing thing. Plants and inanimate objects, they don't have minds. You've got a mind. Just the fact that we've got a mind, that's an amazing thing. We're above average among all the phenomena in the universe. The fact that we have any mind whatsoever is above average. The fact that we don't yet have an enlightened mind, well, don't give yourself a hard time, but we can work towards that, right? You've got a mind. Next stop, let's have an enlightened mind. An enlightened mind is one that has a much better understanding of this reality that we're living in than just a typical instinctive animalistic mind that we're born with naturally. The mind that we're born with naturally is characterized by what we call dualistic appearance. And dualistic appearance, there's multiple meanings here, but basically the idea is that it feels like there's an us versus them thing going on all the time. There's an in here and an out there. And you know, you're probably thinking, of course there is. Of course there's an in here and an out there. That's everything we do in terms of how we describe the world is always based on an in here and out there. And partly that's based on our vision because we're very visual creatures, right? But our tactile awareness, when you touch something, or even the feeling of your body itself, if you can feel your body right now, which part is in here versus out there? That's one reason we focus on breathing meditations, because there is not so much of an in here, out there thing. It's our visual perception that really enhances this sense of difference, distance between self and other. I'll open this so you can see these, but it's not going to make a whole lot of sense necessarily without a bit more explanation. But there's this idea that there's a consciousness in here and then there's forms out there. There is basically, in short, we perceive there to be a gap. And we perceive there to be pleasant things outside and unpleasant things outside. And we don't feel like our mind has anything to do with the creation of these things. And this is the meaning of dualistic appearance. We feel like we are living in a world that is totally outside of our control, that just is out there. And out there, the world out there, there's good things and there's bad things and there's neutral things. And our job is to avoid all the bad things, get all the good things, and ignore all the neutral things. I mean, isn't that our job? Isn't that what we see as our job? Isn't that like what everybody's doing? All you have to do to navigate life successfully is avoid all the bad things, get all the good things, and ignore all the neutral things. But implicit in that is this idea that all of those good things and bad things are somehow out there, separate from yourself, separate from your mind. That, going to Jamaica on a holiday. Jamaica is a good place. It's a great place to go visit on a holiday. And so Jamaica is a good thing. And so you have to go on vacation to Jamaica, right? And because everybody tells you it's a great place, right? So you go there, you show up for vacation, and you have a miserable time. You're fighting with your partner, terrible conditions, whatever happens. All of a sudden, that thing you thought was going to be good was bad. Why? It has everything to do with our mind and the way we perceive the world and how we meet objects. And the goodness or badness of the world is highly subjective and dependent on our perceptions. And this is, anyway, dualistic appearance makes us feel like we have no control over the world. We're living in this world. And so then naturally, that's where attachment comes from. It comes from seeing that there's these awesome things you've got to get out there, these terrible things you have to avoid or become free from. And so that's what fuels this craving, this sort of desire to exist in this world in which we're isolated from everything around us. It's just a mental model. But this is not a mental model that your parents taught you. This is a mental model that we were born with. But because your parents were also born with this mental model, and the rest of people in society also have this mental model, so then society does reinforce these tendencies. Society reinforces these ways of thinking. Even most philosophers reinforce these ways of thinking. And so the only way to unwind this is to begin to look more deeply inside of our own mind. Now, at the root of these are ignorance and then our behaviors, what are called compositional actions. And all of this, obviously, you could spend a lot more time learning all of these things. But all that this means is that why do we perceive the world in this way? Because there is a cycle of habits. That's one of the reasons I like this book, Atomic Habits, because these things flow in a cycle, that because of our ignorance, we act in certain ways, and that creates a tendency to see this difference between inside and outside. We act on the world. And so when we engage in an action, actions in particular create this strong sense of self because they create an actor. You can't engage in actions if there is no actor. So this actions are really what create this foundation. But of course, then it cycles all around and around. So that's where these arrows kind of looping back from this cycle. So this is what's called the 12 dependent related links. We've run out of time, but anyway, I wanted to at least sow the seeds for this. There's a lot more that we could say, but introduce some of these concepts. You've heard me talk about this 50 times in the past, but all of the things that I talk about, they can all be rooted in this mental model. So there's really just another way of trying to introduce that these concepts here in a visual way. So, okay, let's take just a minute to come to a close, just reflecting that even in this brief time here together, we have deepened our wisdom, or perhaps at least opened the door to want to understand more about this subject. And this doubt, or this curiosity, or this wisdom, all of these are the seeds for deeper understanding that can unlock entirely new ways of understanding ourselves and our world, and allow us to stop putting fuel in this fire that is this fire of ignorance that is burning and causing suffering for ourselves and others.